In anticipation of the ratification of the convention, draft legislation to implement its provisions had been introduced in the House and the Senate. Soon after the subcommittees completed their work on the legislation, the Titanic disaster brought renewed focus to the need for radio regulation. The nearby ship Californian had attempted to warn the Titanic of the presence of an ice field. After being rebuffed by the Titanic's radio operator, the Californian's radio operator went off duty and as a result did not hear the Titanic's distress call. The ship that ultimately rescued more than 700 of the Titanic's passengers, the Carpathia, had difficulty maintaining communications with shore stations because of interference from other vessels. In the wake of the ratification of the Berlin Convention and spurred by the Titanic tragedy, Congress enacted the Radio Act of 1912. That act made 3 key decisions that would shape radio regulation for decades to come. First, the Radio Act of 1912 addressed the problem of potential interference by classifying and separating types of transmissions. Congress established separate bandwidths for the government, for private and coastal stations, and for amateur users. The function of setting aside different bandwidths for different uses is often called allocation. Second, the Radio Act of 1912 prohibited interstate, foreign, or maritime radio communications except by those with a license issued by the Secretary of Commerce and Labor. So the statute provided that the U.S. government would determine who would receive a license to use the radio spectrum. The function of granting a particular user a license is often called assignment. Third, the Act established a hierarchy of use. In addition to receiving preferred bandwidths, government operators were not subject to many of the restrictions that applied to non-government stations. So through the Radio Act of 1912, the United States government assumed substantial control over critical aspects of the radio spectrum. The government wouldn't simply define rights to use the spectrum and enforce those rights if conflicts arose. Rather, it would say which services would operate where, which services should receive priority, and who would be licensed to operate those services. And as we'll see, the effects of these key regulatory decisions remain with us today.